Caen had been taken on the 19th of July. Immediately afterwards, the Canadians started an attack on Verriere Ridge. The assault continued up to the 27th of July, with the ridge still in German hands. The Canadians had suffered 2,800 casualties. Now, Operation Totalise was launched on the 7th of August at 11 p.m. The objective was to sweep down towards Fillers and take the high land just north of Fillers. It would be a launch pad for Tractable, which would be the taking of Fillers. It was a Canadian and British enterprise, mainly Canadian. The attack went well, but slowed after taking Saint-Aignan-de-Crémenil and Hautmenil. General Simmons decided to relaunch Totalise on the 9th with added vigour, and this became Totalise Phase 2. Now we're at Cintheaux, just next to the Canadian cemetery. Behind me you can see where Michael Wittman was killed on the 8th, on the first day of Totalise. For Totalise 2, Brigadier Booth changed some of the objectives for certain units. On the 8th, the Halfpenny Force hadn't advanced too well, so instead of sending them to capture Hill 195, they were given the objective of taking Bretteville-le-Rabais. A fresh unit led by Lieutenant Colonel Worthington from the British Columbia Regiment was set to take Hill 195. Taking this hill would open the way to Fillers, which was a vital objective. Fillers would become the name of the gap that was being formed, where 100,000 Germans were being trapped, and they were now trying to get out. If you find these videos useful, the best way to help the channel is by smashing a like early on. The Google algorithm likes that. You can also pass comments, share the video, or even join the Patreon, or buy the books I suggest in the description. The Worthington Force set out from L'Orguichon in the dark at 2:30 in the morning, and they got to Cintheaux, which is where we are now, at 4 o'clock. The Worthington Force was made up of British Columbia Regiment men and the Algonquins. Now, as they reached Cintheaux, the lead squadron dealt with fire coming from the tree line to the east, and then machine gun fire coming from Courvicourt Church. Now, this road behind me coming through Cintheaux is actually a Roman road that comes from Bayeux. It goes through Vieux. It's on the way to M, which is spelled E-X-M-E-S, Xmas, pronounced M. Now, we're on this road in the video on Operation Epsom, Hill 112. It passes by there. Now, if we look the other way, you can see the road goes straight on. Roman roads were straight as much as they could be. We'll see this later on. The Halfpenny Force was supposed to have cleared Bretteville-le-Rabais, but they left late and they were just engaging. The ground was scarred by the previous day's bombing by the USAF, but that didn't seem to have dampened the ardour of the Germans. That bombing had caused friendly fire casualties. The Worthington Force was supposed to go straight down the Fillers Road and then veer right to Hill 195, which they would be able to see standing up above the horizon. Now, the Halfpenny Force hadn't cleared Bretteville-le-Rabais. They'd left late and they were just engaging. So Worthington had the choice of waiting till they'd cleared it or moving on anyway. So he decided to move on, and to avoid the fire coming from Bretteville, he veered to the left. So he went between Bretteville-le-Rabais and Courvicourt. And coming under fire anyway from Bretteville, they veered left again. Now, the moon was in its first quarter, so it didn't give much light, and they were in the early morning dusk, and there was a mist as well, so they couldn't see very well, looking out of their vision slit. They crossed this road without realising it, then veered to the right and discovered a straight road on their right. Being on a night attack that they'd never trained for, having changed objective at the last minute and peering through the vision slit in the dark mist, they took this road to be the Caen Falaise road. After all, straight roads are quite rare in Normandy. This was actually a Roman road that had been used by William the Conqueror in his flight from assassins in 1046. We were on it in the video on Operation Epsom at Hill 112. This is where the seeds of disaster were sown. The aerial photo shows the path it took. After crossing the Chemin Haussé, they followed it, believing it was the Caen Falaise road. So it was along here they made their final approach towards this highland along the Roman road called the Chemin Haussé. They continued up here to the summit. Now just over there we can see Covicourt, where we came through. You can just about make out the Roman road coming this way. We're just on the side of Hill 140. As they advanced, they were firing at haystacks, some of which blew up. Just south of Covicourt there was some German vehicles which they destroyed. And as they continued, they saw this high land here, and they took it to be Hill 195 because they thought we're on the Caen Falaise road. Worthington set up a fortress position in his field, which is actually point 111. He radioed to HQ that they'd arrived at Hill 195. He said there was no enemy present, but there were signs of enemy occupation. There were trenches and some tools. He said he'd hold on until friends came to relieve them. He didn't realise that it was actually at Hill 111, which was 4 miles from Hill 195. And during the day, even though they had contacts with the RAF, Polish tanks and troops that escaped back to base, HQ never knew where they were. Operation Totalise has smashed through the defences of the 89th Infantry Division and the remains of the 12th SS Panzers. Kurt Meyer was frantically trying to reorganise his defences. Hill 195, which is 4 miles over there, was held by the 3rd Battalion of the 26th Panzer Grenadier Regiment. Kenny Wood, which is just a bit nearer, there was the 501st Heavy Tank Tiger Battalion. From the Falaise Road to point 140, which is just more or less here, it was Kampfgruppe Waldemiller who was holding it. And north of the Rouve, which is over there, it was Kampfgruppe Kraus. Not all units of the Worthington Force got to Hill 111. A squadron of the BCR and D Company of the Algonquin, they were last in the order of march. They came up to Estrie-la-Campagne, and that was occupied by German forces, tanks and anti-tank guns. Now the odds were stacked against them, but they had to take them on. Major Sterling of D Squadron was coming up behind, but Major Sidnus told him to stay back until they dealt with the Germans. By the time that Major Sidnus saw the way the battle was going, it was too late to advance because the mortar fire and anti-tank gun fire held them off. The result was that 2 Tigers were knocked out and 17 anti-tank guns, but the squadron was annihilated. Now Major Sterling now had no contact with the main body, and so he joined the Halfpenny Force in Bretteville-Rabais. Obersturmfuhrer Meitzel was sent from Kennywood to locate the Kampfgruppe Waldemiller. His armoured car was fired on by the BCR tanks, but it wasn't hit, and he escaped rapidly back to Kennywood. He told Max Wunsch what was happening, and he was rapidly preparing a counterattack onto the Canadians. Worthington was calmly organising his defences. The field went along here long. It was longer than it was wide. He put the tanks around the perimeter with the half tracks in between them. His command tank was in the middle of the field. Now here there was a wood. In the southwest corner of the wood, which is the far corner, he put mortars there to stop any Germans getting into the wood. The men in the field were calm, but they had difficulty digging trenches in the shallow topsoil on this high ground. Meitzel was heading back to the area to get more information on the Canadians. This time his armoured car was hit and he was thrown out the turret by the explosion. He was taken prisoner. From the high ground to the south, near the Brèche au Diable, or the Breach of the Devil, Kurt Meyer could see what was happening at Hill 140, or point 111. In Kurt Meyer's hastily developed plan, Kampfgruppe Wunsch was supposed to set up defences on Hill 140, here. There was harassing fire coming from the 30-acre wood over there, and there was fire coming from the north, which is that way. Now Worthington sent some tanks towards the north to see what was there. They were firing from here, they were just firing, they couldn't see anything. So the tanks went off to find targets, and they were destroyed. Down there, just out of sight, is where the first tanks sent to counterattack unseen guns were knocked out. The tanks were destroyed just here by the road by guns that they couldn't see. At 0900 hours, Worthington sent 2 troops of tanks to the 30-acre wood to deal with the Germans there. Number 4 troop just had 2 tanks. They were followed by number 3 troop, which was to give them covering fire. Even though they came under fire, Major Stock's tanks got to the wood, and he saw there was the Germans setting up strong defences with trenches. He was just firing some high explosive shells into the position when a Tiger fired at him. The first shell missed and hit a tree. The second shell hit the tank, and Major Stocks was thrown out the tank. The other tank of troop number 4 was destroyed, and 2 tanks of troop number 3. Now Major Carson sent the rest of the survivors into the woods to destroy the German troops there. From here, Worthington could see what was happening. He sent the half-track to go and pick up the survivors. It was Lieutenant Jenkinson was sent to pick them up. The driver he picked wasn't very enamoured with the task. On the way there, they met Major Stock walking back. The half-track picked up some survivors from the woods and then headed back. The others had to walk back. Even Sergeant Walbrook, who had lost a foot. Kurt Meyer had witnessed the first attacks on the Canadians from the top of the Brèche au Diable, near Mont. He then went to Kenny Wood to organise the following attacks. The first major counterattack came at 10 a.m. It was somewhat of a relief to the Canadians. The mortars stopped firing and they had targets to fire at. 4 tanks and 200 infantry were involved. This attack was repulsed with heavy casualties of the Germans. During the day, numerous attempts were made to break into their position, each one repulsed with heavy German casualties. After the first attack, Worthington held an orders group by his command tank in the centre of the field. An armour-piercing shell hit the tank, killing CSM Primo and severing the leg of Lieutenant Colonel Hay. Just before 8 a.m, HQ Force CAB asked by radio for the position. Worthington replied that they were at point 195. An hour later the request was repeated, and Worthington gave the same reply. HQ had repeated the request, as there was no sign of the Worthington Force from units near Hill 195. By midday, half of the 55 tanks that arrived at point 111 had been destroyed. Worthington ordered the remaining half-tracks to load up with wounded and make a dash for it. Even though they were marked with the red crosses, they were fired at. 2 or 3 of the 6 carriers got back to base. The last recorded message between HQ and Worthington was at 9 a.m. Brigadier Booth was deeply disturbed by the silence. The Governor-General foot guards were ordered to go and find them at point 195, but they didn't set out till the afternoon after having cleared Bretteville-l'Abbaye. Major General Kitching thought they had overshot the hill and were near Pottigny. Nobody thought to look elsewhere. Brigadier J.N. Lane, the Royal Artillery Commander, set off in his Ulster spotter plane to search. He couldn't cross the front line, but flew down the main road till he could see Falaise. Hill 195 was on his right. If he looked left, the smoke from Worthington Force tanks would have been clearly visible. If he did see them, he probably thought they were the Poles. There were several contacts with the Allied units during the day, which could have transmitted the whereabouts of Worthington to HQ. Lieutenant Stock had been taken out by the half-tracks. He reported to Lieutenant Brooks at Bretteville-l'Abbaye that Worthington was at square 0947. That's where Worthington believed they were, but the reference was just north of Hill 195, 4 miles from their actual position. Worthington was still in contact with his RSM, J. He sent a message to bring forward the reserve of ammunition. His attempt was met with fierce fire from the Germans that destroyed a Crusader anti-aircraft tank. J contacted elements of the Polish Armoured Division, but their attempt to deal with the Germans was led with the loss of several tanks. They received support from 2 RAF Typhoons. They first attacked this easy target, but the Canadians laid out white squares in a line as recognition, which the Typhoons acknowledged. The Typhoons returned several times during the day to fire on the German troops and tanks. If they reported friendly troops beyond the bomb line, this was never forwarded to HQ. They also had support from the 1st Polish Armoured Division. They had landed on Juno Beach in July and were fighting alongside the Canadians. Like the RAF, they fired on these tanks first, but on seeing the recognition smoke, they stopped firing and surged forward to assist. When they were a mile away, the Germans recognised the threat posed by these Poles and concentrated on them. This gave a welcome respite to the Canadians. The Poles managed to break up a formation of German tanks getting ready to attack the Canadians, but suffered serious losses and forced to withdraw. Around midday, Captain Baker, a forward observation officer for the 19th Field Regiment, sent a radio message for smoke shells to be sent onto Worthington's position. They fell a mile short, but this shows that somebody outside Worthington's position knew where they were, but the information was never sent up to HQ. By 1500 hours or 1530, Worthington decided to get the tanks to break out. There were only 8 out of the initial 55 still mobile. The infantry were well entrenched. All but one of the tanks managed to join up with the Polish forces. In the late afternoon, Worthington realised that the end was near for the force, but he still held out hope of being relieved. His luck ran out at 1730 when a mortar shell fell near him and killed him instantly. Major McPherson took command. He agreed with Major Monk that the men should try to get out as darkness fell, but the Germans were already getting ready for the final attack. In a roar of machine guns and tank engines, the Germans swarmed into the field. Many Canadians were taken prisoner, but some managed to escape in the confusion. The Worthington Force suffered 85 killed out of 240 casualties and lost 47 tanks. On several occasions, this breakthrough of the German lines could have been exploited, but the communications never connected properly. The Typhoons saw the Allied troops on Hill 140. The escaping half-tracks could have explained where they'd been. The Poles realised Worthington was at Hill 140, but the information was never sent up to HQ. This is a memorial to the Worthington Force. It's just below where they were held out. That wood to the left is 30 acre wood, and the wood to the right is just the end of the field where they were. The field came this way, lengthwise from that wood. And over on the horizon we can see Hill 195. Hill 195 was finally taken on the 11th of August by the Argyll and Sutherlands. They just walked up the hill in single file from the north, avoiding the German defences, and started to dig in. So taking the hill was quite easy, except they had difficulty digging trenches in this hard ground. But then of course they had to defend it against German counterattacks. Now, Fierre is just 7 miles away now. That took another week.